So Chris Mannix, longtime NBA reporter, does it for Sports Illustrated. Senior writer, hosts the Crossover Pod. So we could only afford his boxing pod. Hopefully we will accumulate. Draymond Green's going to make us all rich, so then we'll be able to afford the whole Chris Mannix package. Let's start with that. You know, people are forgetting when they criticize the pod, they're not giving the Celtics credit. He did the pod during the Mavericks series, the Memphis series, and the regular season. The difference is Celtics are really good, and they have marginalized and shrunk several NBA stars. I mean, Kevin Durant had his worst series as a pro. It's like, can we give the Celtics credit? It's the best defense I've seen since the Jordan Bulls, right?
Yeah, I was at the Jordan Bulls. I think of the early 90s bad boy Pistons. You have to go back literally decades to find a defense that is as versatile and tough and just diverse in every area that the Celtics are. They lock you down with great perimeter defenders. They've got a premier shot blocker in Robert Williams, who even at I think he's 60% right now playing through that knee injury. He's still able to contest and block a lot of shots for in that last game. It's not anything Draymond is saying on his podcast. I did feel a little bit bad for Jake Fisher. I know Jake a little bit. He used to work at SI, and I don't think he had bad intentions when he kind of was asking Draymond that question about giving away stuff on the pod, but wrong time to ask Draymond that. He was not looking to entertain that theory at all.
Listen, this is the simplest way to describe what I'm seeing. The Celtics don't even need Jason Tatum to play well to control much of the series. The Warriors need Steph to be great for 4 quarters, or at least 3, or they're done in this series. The role players, the non-starters, the non-stars for the Celtics are contributing mightily in this series. And the Warriors, many of their young players, Moody's not ready, Kuminga's not ready, Wiseman's not healthy, Poole's hit and miss. I said this today on television. Most, not all, but most championship teams have a majority of their best players in their prime. Celtics do, Warriors don't. Little old there, little young there. I think it's that simple. I think the fact that Boston can control the series and Tatum has been okay, I kind of feel like the Warriors are doomed. Am I overreacting?
No, I don't think so. And look, I picked the Celtics to win in 6 to start this series because everything I've seen from Boston, and I've been up close and personal with them since the start of the season, but everything I've seen from Boston from late January on suggests that they're the real deal. I mean, if you look at the numbers from mid-January to the end of the season, they weren't just the best defense in the NBA. They were the best defense in the NBA by a country mile. And we mentioned the top, they're generationally good defense. And to your point, they don't need Jason Tatum to go off to put up between 105 and 115 points. They need Tatum to contribute in other ways. They need him to be a facilitator, which is something that Ime Udoka has drilled into him really from the start of the season. But as long as he's contributing in that way, they don't need him to be a carry the team type of offensive player because they do have a wide selection of weapons they can go to. I mean, Jaylen Brown, I thought in game 3, set the tone in that game. I mean, he was the one out there being aggressive early on. Jaylen's the kind of guy, Colin, that he heard and read every single thing that was out there about Draymond Green locking him up in game 2, about the way the Warriors pivoted to Draymond on Jaylen and the impact that had on him. And he came out looking like he was determined to show that he was better than that. On top of that, Al Horford, more the player that scored the 20s in game 1 that scored the 2 points in game 2. Grant Williams started to make a couple of shots. Peyton Pritchard made a couple of shots. The margin for error for Boston is just a lot wider than the margin for error with Golden State. You know, Klay had a great game 3, but I'm not banking on Klay playing like that the rest of the series. Everything I've seen of Klay this postseason tells me that when he's left alone for standalone jump shots, he's the old Klay Thompson. When he's asked to play on the move or run off screens, he is a diminished version of himself because his body's not all the way back from those lower leg injuries. So, Steph is now hurt with what he says is the same injury that cost him, like a month plus towards the end of the season, maybe a little bit better than what that was. I just think Golden State is in a world of trouble to where it's the point where if Boston wins game 4, I think they win this series in 5.
Yeah. So I'll throw this at you that J.A. Adonde was on my TV show, and he said, they should have strongly considered moving him because they're trying to pull two things together. The best player on this team is Steph Curry, and he's the soul of the team. So I would say Steph's got 2 more really good years, and cross your fingers on health, and then you'll see some diminished Steph. But he's got 2 more really good years left. And that may be at 60 games, not 82. They may rest him, right? Like we're seeing with LeBron now, it's the injuries pile up. So Moody's 20, Kuminga's 19, Wiseman's 21. Okay, they are 2 years away from really lining up. They won't peak then, as we see the growth with Jaylen Brown and the growth with Jason Tatum. They'll be in their prime at 24. They're 4 years away. So there's an argument to be made. If you get beaten 5 games in this series, Draymond's expensive, Clay's expensive, Wiggins expensive, Steph expensive, and the young guys don't line up with Steph. And I'll just throw this at you, Chris. You're very connected. I think you have to consider, because you're not moving off Steph. He's still too great. And you're probably not moving Clay and Draymond because of the history. I think you move Wiggins potentially, and I think you have to move one of these young guys or 2 to get a player that can help you now. I know it seems that's not what the Warriors do. They draft and develop. But Chris, if you don't line up in Steph's timeline, what's the point, right?
It's a gut-wrenching decision that Bob Myers is going to have to make, because even though we've seen very little of James Wiseman, he has big-time talent. He could turn out to be the next great center in the NBA. What we've seen from Kuminga and Moody suggests they might be as early as 2 years away from contributing to a championship team and maybe even being capable of leading one. But right now, they're not. And I agree with you. You have to decide if you're going to maximize this window of Steph, Clay, and Draymond, which is probably 2 to 3 years, and sacrifice some of these young guys to go and get them. Now, I see, at least early on, when I talk to people across the league, I see 2 options for them immediately. One is Bradley Beal.
Yes.
We haven't heard a lot about Bradley Beal over the last couple of months, but I believe he's going to want to go somewhere else. That's just my gut feeling from talking to people that know Bradley Beal. And if he does, you don't have to sacrifice too much young talent to get him in a sign and trade. Maybe it's Andrew Wiggins, maybe it's one other piece, and you can get Bradley Beal, who fits the timeline that we're talking about. The other player that gets brought up a lot in NBA circles is Rudy Gobert. Now, Rudy Gobert, you'd have to give up something to get him. You'd have to give up 1 or 2 of your young players to extract him from Utah. We know Danny Ainge plays hardball in deals like this. He's not going to just hand over Rudy for nickels on the dollar. But you can see the value that Rudy Gobert would bring to this Warriors team. They are not a team loaded with plus defenders. Draymond is a plus defender. Andrew Wiggins is a plus defender. But Steph, even though he was a lot better this year, you wouldn't say he's a plus defender. Klay Thompson, maybe he gets back to that. But what have you seen from Klay during these playoffs, Colin? Who is he guarding? He's guarding bigger players because he doesn't have the lateral quickness right now to be the Klay Thompson defensively that he once was. Maybe he gets it back. Maybe a full offseason gets him back to being that player. But right now, you have to question whether he's going to be a plus defender moving forward. Jordan Poole, I don't ever see that. I don't see him ever becoming a plus defender. So you bring in Rudy Gobert, and he has the ability to transform your defense in just one move and make you a better defensive team. Now you lose something. You can't switch like they do right now, and you have to recreate your defense a little bit. But he gives them a defensive presence that they're clearly lacking. So that's another name that I hear talked a lot when it comes to Golden State.
Let me throw this at you. The advantage being the Patriots with that culture for years. They always got great value when they moved players because Wiggins is a great example. You move into a great culture. I mean, he was sort of lost and people were done with him. And now it's like, So the truth is, you're going to get more from him than he'll probably deliver to another culture. And that's where Jordan Poole is interesting. If you brought Bradley Beal over, Poole, this may be it. He was a G Leaguer not long ago. This may be it. So if you think to yourself you'd have Poole and Steph and Clay and Beal, the guy I think you consider moving is Jordan Poole. I think this is it. I think he's a hot and cold player. He's a B player that has A nights. You put him with Washington, he could end up being a bounce around the league guy.
Jordan Clarkson. He could become Jordan Clarkson in a way.
That's right. Yeah. So that's one thing the Warriors have is everybody looks a half a grade better in their culture than they are. I don't know if I like Gobert. I have been the biggest Bradley Beal fan for years. I think Pat Riley wants Bradley Beal because I think he wants a true number one scoring option. And I think you're seeing this with Giannis in the East, with Robert Williams in the East. Bam's a defensive player. He's completely shut down. And Jimmy Butler's more athlete than scorer. So I think all this is just fascinating. Let's pivot back to the series. So Ime Udoka comes into the Celtics, and they have a really bad first 2 months. And you don't always see that in football coaching. Sometimes Sean McVay goes to the Rams. It works instantly with Jared Goff. But in basketball, it's different. For some reason, Spoelstra, LeBron, Wade, it took like 20 games to get it right. You were there. Why were they so bad early?
Yeah, I was there, and over the weekend, I spoke to Ime Udoka on the phone for about 20 minutes about this specific subject. And we talked about the resistance that he faced from these Celtics players early on to two specific things that he was trying to implement. Defensively, they play very differently from how they played under Brad Stevens. The way this team switches, only a handful of teams in the NBA do it, largely because if you don't have a point guard that can switch in the way that Marcus Smart can switch, there's no point in doing it. And the Celtics, for the last 10 years, they have often or always really had a lead guard who has been a defensive liability, whether it was Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie Irving, Kemba Walker. You had to hide that player. So the Celtics, they were transforming their defense in training camp to become something totally different, to the point where Ime told me that Jason Tatum came to him in the first week of training camp and saying, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe we should go back to some of the principles that we used in previous seasons. Ime's message, just stick with it and force them to stick with it. The other part on the other end of the ball was that, Ime, he had a bird's eye view of these Celtics for the last 2 years. He was an assistant on Brett Brown's staff when they lost to Boston in the bubble. He was an assistant on Steve Nash's staff when they beat them in the first round. He knew what this team needed. And what this team needed was for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to stop being so focused on being one-on-one players and become playmakers, to embrace that part of the offensive game. It was funny, Colin, you go back even further to when Ime was introduced as the Celtics head coach. He's sitting up there next to Brad Stevens, and somebody asks him about improvements. And Ime specifically cites that the Celtics were 27th in assists in that previous season. Looks over at Brad kind of sheepishly and is like, sorry, Brad. Sorry, I had to say it, but we need to improve in that area. So he knew what this team needed to do to get better. It just took them months to figure it out and to really embrace it. They weren't truly bought in probably until after the first of the year. There were flickers towards the end. You remember that Phoenix game on New Year's Eve where they just blew the doors off the Suns? They were moving the ball really well there. But it wasn't until mid to late January where it all started to coalesce and they completely bought in. So that's basically what it boils down to. They just weren't embracing what Ime wanted them to do in those first 2 months of the season.
You know, my belief is it's always easier to get football players to buy in than basketball players because you can cut them. And basketball players have dual incomes. They have shoe incomes. Now they have social incomes. And it is a players' league. It has been since the 70s. And so it is harder to move guys a little bit in your direction until they start losing or being embarrassed. Where in the NFL, you just get cut. Like, you're going to do it. It's the shield. It's the coach. It's the GM. So I think that's my belief is Ime, you know he's smart. You know he knows what he's doing. He's a forceful presence. But I think it is harder sometimes. Eric Spoelstra, they were winning games, and LeBron wasn't happy. And, you know, it's harder when guys are established and they're stars. And I know Spoelstra. You know him probably better than I do. But it's not that they don't think he's intellectually capable or basketball savvy. It's hard to move basketball stars off positions. And I think, you know, and Boston's guys weren't superstars, but they'd had real success. They'd had 3 Eastern Conference Finals. You know, I felt before the series, and this is probably naive.
You know, let me just add one other thing, Colin, on Ime. One thing he did that surprised me that worked was his tough love paid off. I mean, I do TV in Boston as well for NBC Sports, and I do the pre- and post-game show. And I can't tell you the number of times I sat on that desk after bad losses, watching an Ime press conference and then responding to it after he had just taken out the blowtorch and napalm these guys. Like, he was hitting them hard. He wasn't, you know, Brad Stevens, his philosophy, as it is with many coaches in the NBA, was to take it all on him. It was the coach's fault. I made all the mistakes. It's not the players, because he believed that was in the best interest of the team. Ime didn't do that. Ime just went out there and specifically cited guys who weren't getting the job done. I remember thinking, this is never going to work. Like, a coach with no resume to speak of, a first-year head coach on any level, blasting his team in the way Ime is never going to work. But it turns out that's exactly the kind of coaching that these Celtics crave, and exactly the kind of coaching that they ultimately responded to. So it was, you know, and look, a quick example, Robert Williams is playing in this series right now because Ime Udoka spent the first 2 months of the year, and even before that, into training camp, finding 900 ways to call Robert Williams soft, to basically imply that Robert Williams in years past did not play through pain as much as he should have. Fast forward through this season, there's a toughness to Robert Williams that simply did not exist in previous years. And that's what's enabling him to go out there on one leg, coming back a month after knee surgery, and give them 20, 25 good minutes every single night. That's a direct result of the tough love Ime Udoka showed him.
You know, there was a point, and again, it's been a players' league forever, but there was a point where a few years ago, and some of this, it sounds crazy, but Donald Trump had everybody on edge in this country. And it was very polarizing. And the players, the NBA players, I thought rightly so, took a real stand. Like, this shit ain't going to fly. You're with him, you're not with us. And not that the NBA had coaches that were Republican or conservative or pro-Trump, but the players were empowered, and they felt strongly about a social situation in our country. And I think a lot of coaches in that process put their arms around those players and double down on their empowerment. I thought it was the right thing to do, but that can be difficult for 24, 25, 26-year-old players. Then you have to pivot back to, okay, I'm going to hard coach your ass the next year. And maybe I'm just reaching here, but it's always been a players' league. But I did feel there was a time when the players really were the league needed the coaches, the GMs, the commissioner. No. We're not going to have a president criticizing our players. Period. Then the pandemic, the bubble, and then you got to pivot back to that, and it really works. Steve Kerr can coach hard. Ime coaches hard. Pop coaches hard. Spoelstra coaches hard. I do think players want to be coached hard. I really do, Chris. In my years of it, Phil Jackson could be brutal. Could be, so I guess my long-winded point was, hard coaching works at every level. It's a little harder. Baseball, long contracts. Basketball, guaranteed contracts. But it works. In your years of covering the Celtics, I think what happened to Brad Stevens is he smartly realized they were tuning him out. He had a player or two that just didn't connect with him, and he realized this is not the time. That was my takeaway. Is he's a smart enough guy, got self-awareness. He's like, you know what? I think Quinn Snyder feels the same way. Like, I'm just running in circles here. I can't figure out the Gobert-Donovan Mitchell issue. I can't solve this jigsaw puzzle. Let's get a former player in here. That's. I mean, so I'm vomiting here, but your thought on that?
No, I think when it comes to hard coaching, you have to read the room, right? I mean, Brad Stevens, for his entire time in Boston, I viewed him as a top 10 coach. At times, I felt he was a top 5 coach in the NBA. His play calling, his understanding of basketball is at an elite level. But as he got towards the end, it certainly, I don't know if his voice was being drowned out or tuned out, but it wasn't having the same impact. The players were not responding in the way they responded early in the careers of Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Marcus Smart. And to Brad Stevens' credit, he didn't go out there and find someone that he could connect with or relate with on a personal level. He went out there and found the anti-Brad Stevens. He found a coach who was philosophically and in terms of coaching background, completely different. Ime Udoka, ex-player, never been a head coach on any level, longtime assistant, defensive-minded guy as he was in his previous 2 stops in Brooklyn and in Philadelphia. He found a guy that could give this team something that he couldn't. That's one of the biggest reasons the Celtics are here right now. And I agree with you on Quinn Snyder. I think it's the exact same type of situation. I don't know if a new coach is going to be able to come in and elevate that team to a Celtics-like level. There are just too many flaws with that roster, beginning on the defensive side. But I do think they would respond better to a different coach than Quinn Snyder.
Yeah. Well, I'm just enjoying the hell out of these playoffs. I like tonight, we're taping this on Thursday. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I got nothing to do. This is as much fun. This playoff run to me, we've had just enough nonsense with Harden and Simmons, just enough craziness. We've had shocking upsets where Game 7, Phoenix at home is sandblasted by Dallas. Maybe I'll regret this, but I've been pretty accurate picking the series. I think Boston's the better team. I don't think Robert Williams is a solvable issue. I don't think they're going to score on the interior. Listen, I said this. The Warriors have become a bar stool missing a leg. The Celtics can score now low perimeter transition. The Warriors can score perimeter transition. They can't score down low. If Robert plays 28 minutes, they can't score. You've just taken a bar stool away from their offense. I think that's the series. I know it sounds crazy that Robert Williams is the series, but I'm watching these games. I'm like, when he's on the floor, Warriors are completely limited.
He had a profound impact on the second half of Game 3, especially in that fourth quarter. I did think it was interesting that the Celtics played brilliantly in the first quarter. Williams went to the bench 3 minutes in, and they went small and played with that lineup, which I think speaks to the different ways that the Celtics can beat you. The Warriors in the half court have no shot against the Celtics defense. Their efficiency numbers in the half court in this series are terrible. They need Boston to beat itself. They need the Celtics to throw the ball around the gym, commit 18 turnovers like they did in Game 2, 11 live ball, so they can get 33 points in transition. That's what they need to have happen. They need the Celtics to just implode once again in the third quarter, as they have, frankly, for every game in this series, but a little bit less in Game 3. If the Celtics don't beat themselves, I don't see any path for Golden State to beat Boston. There just are too many ways for the Celtics to win and not enough ways for Golden State to do it.
Chris Mannix, Sports Illustrated. We've got him doing boxing for us and guesting on basketball. I've said this before on the volume. We're very lucky. We're a small company. We're just starting, and we got some huge breaks early. And I didn't even know Chris Mannix was available. I got a call from somebody. He said, "What do you think of Chris Mannix?" And I'm like, "Wow, we're a legitimate media company. We can employ Chris Mannix. You're great. You know what I think of you." And I'm happy for Boston. You know what? California's won a lot of championships recently. It's time. The Red Sox aren't going to win this year. The Yankees are, so it's going to be a really rough New England summer. The Patriots aren't the same franchise. It looks like the new big shots in town are the Celtics, and it's great seeing you, buddy.
And Colin, this is for the Celtics, not to put the cart ahead of the horse, but all these guys, or most of these guys, are 25, 26 years old. Most of these guys are under contract for the long term. I think the Celtics eventually will have to figure out the heir to Al Horford. He'll probably be back next year on the same contract, but they have real staying power. And on the subject of the volume, man, kudos to you for the foresight for Draymond. Like I woke up this morning and the first thing I did was listen to Draymond Green's podcast. The first thing I did, because I wanted to hear his reaction to the game, his reaction to the crowd. And he is unfiltered. I'll say that. He's been such a great addition.
Thanks, Chris. Great seeing you.
You got it.